We need to be really clear about something here. Donald Trump doesn't care about merit. Donald Trump doesn't care about merit. Are you kidding? You think that guy cares about qualifications? If Donald Trump cared about merit, Pete Hegseth would not be the Secretary of Defense. If Donald Trump cared about merit, then J.D. Vance, who has less experience than someone widely considered to be the least experienced vice president in modern history, Dan Quayle.
I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
J.D. Vance would not be the vice president. Robert Kennedy Jr. wouldn't be up for Health and Human Services, a man who not only does not have appropriate experience for the job, but you could say has negative experience, who is actively unsuited to the job. And Kash Patel, who just appears to be one of the president's flunkies, wouldn't be up to be FBI director. And you can kind of go down the list. None of these people have merit, are experienced, are qualified. All of them are there because they're loyal to the president. Trump doesn't care about merit, but he does talk about merit all the time. It's the centerpiece in his war on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. He insists that the country has moved in the direction of no merit, of something less than meritocratic, and that getting rid of DEI is how we're going to restore merit to the federal government, to the country at large. Now, no one, of course, asked questions about the fact that there was never really a time in American history where things were perfectly meritocratic. And in fact, for most of the country's history, in order to get any kind of job that provided economic security or upward mobility, you had to have a certain race and a certain gender. If you wanted to get into a good college, you had to have a certain race and a certain gender. So the idea that we lost meritocracy and are trying to get it back just runs counter to the established facts of history. But Trump says we're going to get back meritocracy by getting rid of diversity. And so he revoked a 60-year-old Trump revoked a 60-year-old non-discrimination order. Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, ended military celebrations of Black History Month and Martin Luther King Jr. Day, because of course we want to celebrate merit. Hegseth even made a big show of declaring that diversity is not our strength. And then when Trump went to speak in the aftermath of a tragic aviation accident at the National Airport in Washington, D.C., he made it clear that he thought diversity was responsible for the collision of a Black Hawk helicopter and a passenger airplane.
System, I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary. You remember that. Only the highest aptitude, they have to be the highest intellect and psychologically superior people were allowed to qualify for air traffic controllers. That was not so prior to getting there. When I arrived in 2016, I made that change very early on because I always felt this was a job that, and other jobs too, but this was a job that had to be superior intelligence.
J.D. Vance also told reporters that under Biden, apparently, the government had turned away air traffic controllers because of the color of their skin. And in fact, all the diversity may have made the qualified air traffic controllers less able to do their jobs. Neither the president, nor the vice president, nor the Secretary of Transportation who was there, nor the Secretary of Defense who was there, gave any kind of evidence to support these ridiculous claims. They made no attempt to show that either the pilots or air traffic controllers were unprepared for doing their jobs. They only leaned on the idea that the presence of someone who is non-white or a woman was itself evidence of a lack of qualification. In the mind of the president and his deputies, the mere fact of a person who, again, is non-white or a woman is evidence of some sort of lack of qualifications. To have these people in any kind of sensitive position, the president says, is to necessarily court some kind of disaster. So what does merit mean to a president who uses the word so often? Well, it appears that merit simply means that a white person is there, a white man is there, a white able-bodied man is there, and presumably a straight white able-bodied man is there. Anything else is DEI and thus represents a lack of qualifications. This is run-of-the-mill discrimination, like the definition of discrimination. It's the kind of stuff we tried to banish to the ash heap of history with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. It is the thing that the civil rights movement and the civil rights revolution tried to excise from American society. Imperfectly, incompletely, but that was the goal. But this has to be understood as part of the Trump administration's larger effort to subordinate tens of millions of Americans under hierarchies of race, gender, sexuality, and class. They believe that the proper order of society is one where people like them are on top and the rest of us simply obey. We don't use this word anymore, sort of out of purchase in American life, but there is a word for this kind of politics, for this kind of ideology, and that word is simply segregationist. Remember, segregation, despite I know what the word means, but segregation in practice did not necessarily mean the total separation of black and white Americans or any sort of particular groups of Americans, because in especially the Jim Crow South, that just wasn't possible given the existing social relations. People lived in close proximity to each other, black and white. What segregation meant was a system of subordination that was observed in public, that when black and white people were together in public, one group of people had to defer to the other. One group of people had to show deference. One people had to show that they recognized that they were subordinate people, second-class citizens, as we described. Segregation was the rigid maintenance of a hierarchy of race with the race-based distribution of respect, of rewards, of prosperity, of the ability to live. That is what the administration seems to want, a return to a world where respect and regard and the ability to live are once again distributed on the basis of some kind of rigid hierarchy, one at which they sit at the top and then they can decide who is below them. Seen in this light, the president's obsession with merit isn't really about ensuring the best people. Seen in this light, the president's obsession with merit isn't really about making sure the best people are in office. It's more akin to Woodrow Wilson's efforts to segregate the federal workforce at the beginning of the 20th century. We saw at that press conference an expression of bigotry and prejudice that you don't often see from a president in public. You rarely see from a president in public. And in making those expressions of bigotry and prejudice, the president was directly attacking tens of millions of Americans, hundreds of millions of Americans of different racial and ethnic backgrounds, of different genders, of different disability status. He was shirking his responsibility to represent the entire public and not just a narrow segment of people who support him. Once again, and not for the last time, Donald Trump has disgraced his office. But then, why should anyone be surprised? We knew what he was when we took him in.
Oh, shut up, silly woman, said the reptile with a grin. You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in.